Hi, I'm going to be reading you a story today about Peter Rabbit. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time there was 4 little rabbits, and their name was Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Now, my dear, said old Miss Rabbit one morning, you may go into the field or down the lane, but don't get into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out. Then, Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy and Mopsy and Cottontail were good little bunnies. Went down the lane to go gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuce, and then some French green beans, and then some relish. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of the cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting some young cabbage, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, but he had forgotten the very way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbage and the other shoe along the potatoes. After losing them, he ran 4 legs and went fast, so that he might have forgotten a way if he had unfortunately ran into the gooseberry net and got caught by a large button on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and begged him to try to get free. Mr. McGregor found a sleeve which he intended to put on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind. Peter rushed into the tool shed and jumped into the water can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide if it had not had so much water in it, and Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a fire pot. He began to turn them carefully, looking under each. Suddenly Peter sneezed, "Ka-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to catch Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants, and the window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath, trembling with fright, and he had no idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in the can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, and so very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but he was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her way out to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond, and a white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it was alive. Peter thought it would best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly quite close to him, he heard the noise of a scritching, scratching, scratch, scritch. Peter scrabbled underneath the bushes, but soon as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeked over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackberry bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes of the scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in 2 weeks. That evening, Peter was not very well. His mother put him to bed and gave him chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 teaspoon to be taken at bedtime, she said. But Flopsy and Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. I hope you've enjoyed this story about Peter Rabbit, and I have some things for you to do with the story about Peter Rabbit. You need to write about what the favorite part of the story was for you, and also I want you to look up the parts of a rabbit. Rabbits have parts, just like you and I have parts. So see if you can't find out what the parts of the rabbit is.